I'm the Kinky Polyatheist, and in this episode we're going to talk about the Watchmaker fallacy. Stick around. Alright, this is going to be a quick one. The Watchmaker is a simple little story that, in theory, proves the existence of a creator. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, you can send questions to ask@kinkypolyatheist.com or drop them in the comments. Don't forget, we also now have a podcast and a YouTube channel. You can find links to both in the description. The Watchmaker analogy is pretty simple. Let's say you're walking across a field and you find a watch. The watch clearly is complicated. It tells the time. It was precisely made. And the complexity behind the watch points to a creator. Someone made the watch. So the analogy is, you find something that has complexity and a clear design, and there must be someone who made it. And then that analogy is applied to the world and life and everything, and how the universe and life and nature are so complex and everything comes together so perfectly that clearly there must be a designer or a creator. Honestly, I'm kind of annoyed. Religious people do this all the time. They constantly come up with these crazy, contrived examples and then drop it on us to somehow find the flaws in their logic and prove them wrong. No. Maybe they should educate themselves. Maybe they should do a Google search before they make these claims. Just because an analogy lines up on one point doesn't mean it lines up on all points. It doesn't just make it true. Yes, a watch is complex. Yes, a watch has a creator. Yes, the universe seems kind of complex. No, that doesn't mean that there's a creator. It means the universe is complex. For some reason, religious people think it's okay to use flawed logic to just throw out examples that somehow are supposed to prove the existence of God, and then we have to find all the flaws in their logic. And I'm kind of tired of it. I'm not going to do it. How about you go educate yourself on how logic actually works? The Watchmaker analogy is BS, for very clear reasons that you can Google. What I do want to talk about is how us atheists should stop tolerating these long drawn-out stories that religious people create and stop buying into the fact that we might have to find the flaws in their logic. No. When they start telling you these stories, cut them off. Tell them, I want evidence, not a story. I want evidence, not your imagination. Time and time again, they will start a story with little words or little assertions, like, obviously this is true, therefore, they immediately jump to God exists, or there's a creator, or intelligent design. No. Your inability to understand how logic actually works doesn't get you off the hook. It doesn't mean that I have to do the work to break apart your flawed logic. Just say no. Just walk away. Don't waste your time. Instead, listen for red flags. If they start a story with let's pretend, or let's say, or clearly it's obvious that, things like that, you know that they're immediately backing themselves in to make some claim so they can later use that claim as an analogy to prove the existence of God, which is always flawed BS. If God existed, there would be evidence of God. Your imagination and your big, long, contrived story is not evidence of God. I'm not listening to it anymore. Your story is evidence of a story. Your story is evidence of flawed logic. Your story is evidence of your own ignorance and inability to use logic correctly. Your story is probably evidence of logic fallacies. Go educate yourself. As an atheist, it is not our job to educate them. It is everyone's job to educate themselves. It's everyone's job to make the choice to be curious and look for evidence. And people who don't, people who fall back on faith to stay shrouded in their brainwashing from their religion, they get to choose that, but they also get to choose ignorance. I mean, if they really want a story, how about you just tell them the story of Santa 2.0? I mean, when we're kids, there's Santa. Kids across the world believe in Santa. Santa turns out to be a giant conspiracy put on by adults to get kids to behave for rewards or for coal come Christmas time. Santa is an idea that little kids buy into because parents perpetuate the myth. The whole point behind the story of Santa is to get kids to behave and obey their parents. Do what we say, be good, and you get presents. Don't do what we say or disobey and you get nothing or you get coal. Santa is just an idea that is designed to keep kids in line and under control. God is just Santa 2.0, Santa for adults. It's this mythical being that is basically always watching you, and if you're good and you obey, you get rewarded in heaven. If you're bad, then you go to hell. It's just another means of control. Only this time, the conspiracy is adults against other adults, not adults to children. But there are some remarkable similarities. Everyone knew that kid when they were younger who refused to believe that Santa didn't exist because he was afraid he wouldn't get presents. How many adults do you know like that, who refuse to believe God might not exist because they're afraid of what might happen if they admit it out loud? They're afraid of, say, not going to heaven if God really did exist, and they refuted his existence, which is Pascal's wager, by the way. That's another thing you can Google. I'll leave a link in the description. Isn't it amazing how little kids will fight for the brainwashing that Santa exists because they want the presents? And isn't it amazing how adults will fight for the brainwashing of God because they want promises of the afterlife? In both cases, fear is being used to control someone. Little kids get fear of not getting presents, and because of that, they behave. Adults have the fear of what happens when I die, and they give up control, and they behave because of that. As an atheist, I want to ask all the other atheists out there to stop entertaining stories. Start demanding evidence. If someone starts telling you a big long story, stop them and say, I don't want to hear a story, I want evidence. I don't want to hear your circular logic, I want evidence. And then just stick with that. The Bible is not evidence of God. The Bible is evidence of a book written and rewritten by men for thousands of years. Nature is not evidence of God. Nature is evidence of nature. And natural selection, by the way. So getting back to that watch and the watchmaker, just because life is complex doesn't mean there was a designer. In fact, there's been some amazing observations of natural selection in our lifetime. In our lifetime, there was an island that had crickets on it and tourists. And the tourists brought a bug from another continent. That bug heard the crickets and would home in on them and kill them. Scientists observe all this. And by the way, I'll drop a link to this article in the description. So scientists just happened to be there before and after. And they observed the presence of the crickets and then also the lack of sound. The crickets were gone, or so they thought. It turns out they found the crickets. They still existed. The ones that made noise were the ones that were seeked out and destroyed by the invading species, which hitched a ride on some tourists. The crickets that remained didn't sing. Right there is a clear example of what natural selection looks like in action. Not only in action, but in action in our lifetime. The crickets made noise, an invader came in, the ones that made noise are no longer around. The ones that are still around are the ones that didn't make noise or learned not to make noise. There's survival of the fittest right there. There was no intelligent design. It was just survival of the fittest, just like humans. The complexity of nature doesn't point to a designer or intelligent design or a creator. The complexity of nature is very easily and clearly explained by evolution and natural selection. There's no need to look for a watchmaker. I'm the Kinky Polyatheist, encouraging you to not put up with anything less than evidence of God. Like and subscribe. If you have any questions, send them to ask@kinkypolyatheist.com. You can also drop them in the comments, and keep an eye out in the description for our podcast and our YouTube channel links. Also, I'll drop a link to the article I just mentioned about the crickets. All right, everybody, I'll see you next time.